Well, it is the last day of 2023, and this morning we're looking back at some of the major stories of the year and how the news and media covered those big stories of 2023. Well, hello and welcome to Media and Society. I'm your host, Naledi Mulong. Of course, this is the show where we take a look at the intersection between the media and society. And as usual, the show really isn't complete without your input. So get onto Twitter and get in touch with us using hashtag SABC Media Society. So as we highlight some of the biggest stories of 2023, we're not doing it alone this morning here on Media and Society. I'm joined by some very familiar faces that you've seen on our show many times, particularly over the last year. We're joined by two media analysts, Mr. Tavago Ditshego, who's the founder and CEO of Ditshego Media. Welcome back to Media and Society.
Thank you, Naledi.
Always good to have you with us. Also joining us in studio, Dr. Sfiso Mnisi, head of the School of Communications at the University of Johannesburg. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Naledi. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure having you. So we're going to start with looking at what certainly was one of the biggest stories of 2023, and then we'll speak to our guests and talk a little bit about how well the media did in covering those stories. After almost a decade after the beloved footballer's death, the Senzo Meyiwa trial began anew in July 2023. Now, one thing we saw this year was the trial really has captured the imaginations of all South Africans with legal twists and turns rivaling a soap opera. Let's take a look.
Fists are flying, as you indicated, inside that courtroom on Monday, causing panic. This after, of course, prison warders, you would recall, had told some of the accused to sit properly in the courtroom. This was during the tea adjournment, and now some of those accused are facing assault charges. This has been confirmed by the South African Police Service. Let's take a listen to what Brigadier Athlenda Mate had to say.
The South African Police Service can confirm that we are investigating a case of assault following an incident in court on Monday where a prison official was attacked by accused 3, Carlos Mncube, accused 4, Sifiso Mapisa, and accused 5, Sifiso Kuhlenduli.
And AfriForum's advocate Gerrie Nel, you would recall, was representing the families, in fact been supporting them, says the incident needs to be treated with the seriousness it deserves, as that scuffle had basically taken place while the prison warders were in the execution of their duties. Nel was inside court that day, and I understand that it raised some of the concerns that they had with the prosecution in terms of what took place on Monday. But what we also did see there, Bongiwa, was the fact that security seemed to have been upped since that incident on Monday. Let's take a listen to the concerns that were raised by advocate Gerrie Nel when we spoke to him outside court as the media.
Altercation with a prison warden in the execution of his duty is absolutely serious. So that's why we're here in the main. We've established, though, that the case docket was open. We will provide our service and support if it's needed.
Well, as I indicated, correctional services since beefing up security personnel, escorting these accused to court. Meanwhile, Advocate Gerrie Nel also says it's becoming clearer that Meyiwa's murder was a contract killing. This is something that AfriForum had said since the very beginning. Let's take a listen to what he said with regard to that.
More and more people now understand why we said that from the start. So we had a good understanding of the facts, and that's why we said it from the start. I haven't changed my stance. I do think that it's important that we think it's not a robbery that went wrong, but rather a contract killing. And I do think that as the case develops and as the trial within the trial develops, and if certain statements is admitted, then it will become more clear. But I do think that it's more clear now than it was last year why we said from the start that we believe it's more than a robbery that went wrong.
Meanwhile, the lead investigator in the Senzo Meyiwa murder case, Brigadier Bongani Kininda, is still on the stand. He's denied being part of any alleged assault against accused number 1, Muzi Sibia, as well as accused number 2, Bongani Ntanzi. Kininda continues in cross-examination inside a court tomorrow.
Yeah, that's how the trial essentially wrapped up in 2023, and of course we'll pick up again in the new year. But Criselda Lewis, having done an incredible job alongside our colleague Sipho Kekana of bringing us the Senzo Meyiwa murder trial through the different phases that it's been through this year. But as I mentioned earlier, we are in studio with Dr. Sfiso Mnisi, head of the School of Communications at the University of Johannesburg, and Mr. Tebogo Ditshego, who's the CEO and founder of Ditshego Media, our media analysts, as we wrap up 2023. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Mnisi, and say, one of the things that we saw this trial do was watch South Africans even go to online platforms just to keep up with it. I mean, at any given point, the streaming of the Senzo Meyiwa murder trial would see at least 17,000 viewers at a particular point. I mean, talk to me about what that trial actually did for the South African viewer in 2023, in your view.
I suppose what we've seen through this trial and other ones before it is how the invitation of the media into the courtroom, the way in which we are seeing it now, is somehow playing a very, very interesting role in educating South Africans about the courtroom. Right? We've learned so many things, about the court, just from following the trial itself.
Yeah.
And there's been other events around it, of course, but it has been a very, very interesting trial to watch. And I mean, we try and consume it from various platforms. So that has been, I know it's not a nice thing to say this, it has been educational, but also somehow entertaining in looking at the site events around the trial itself.
Yeah.
Because we get to learn a lot about what is happening in that space.
It's an interesting point. I mean, the view has been made over and over again, that, everyone feels like, they're a lawyer of some kind, having watched the Senzo Meyiwa murder trial. And of course, we're making light of something that is a very serious murder trial here, that South Africans are genuinely quite invested in. I mean, as an analyst, having watched how the media's interacted with the trial, even how, the media's role even in impacting how the trial moves, for instance, has been quite a big show for 2023.
Yeah, so we saw this case now being, the story being told on Netflix.
Yeah.
And it's one of the first cases that you'll see in South Africa after the Oscar Pistorius case that had so much attention. And what we are seeing is that South Africa is borrowing from the United States of America, where O.J. Simpson, who was accused of murdering Nicole Brown Simpson. And that was very controversial, and it actually had an impact of creating two societies. The African Americans were for O.J. Simpson, and then the rest of society were also divided. So it divided society. This has also divided society in some way, because people have their own theories. It's not really, in terms of just two sides. There's so many different sides, and people believe their own conspiracy theories. And the difficulty for the MPA is that they've got a legal strategy. So it's difficult for them to be transparent in terms of where they are going next.
Yeah.
And then you have Advocate Kharinel, who's now coming in and saying, this is my theory. Yeah. And it's becoming more fascinating as time goes on.
Yeah, do you think that there'll be a further story to tell? I mean, in terms of, we've got the first leg of the Netflix movie. Once we get to a resolution, hopefully we will, that there could possibly be another one of those.
No, certainly. Yeah. I think it would be an injustice not to have a second leg of that story. We need to see more.
Yeah, no, I mean, it certainly has been interesting watching how South Africans react to it. It's just one of the big stories of 2023. Here's another one. On the 9th of September 2023, Mangosuthu Buthelezi died at the age of 95, leaving behind a legacy that had many South Africans divided and a big debate on social media and media platforms.
Prince
Buthelezi undoubtedly played a profound role in shaping the history of South Africa for more than half a century. A descendant of Zulu royalty, he always showed pride in his heritage, language, and culture. As a devout Christian and member of the Anglican Church, he was awarded the prestigious Order of St. Michael in 2010 for his distinguished service to the Church Diocese of Zululand. He had been previously presented with the Order of Simon of Cyrene, the highest order granted by the bishops of the Anglican Church of Southern Africa.
I was elected many times to attend synod, the Synod of the Anglican Church, as a lay delegate from my parish, St. Mary's Konjeni, and also in the synod I was sometimes elected as a representative in the provincial synod, which is actually the synod of the whole Anglican Church in Southern Africa, and I used to attend those meetings in Cape Town. I think that's a very important side of my life, which may not have been highlighted as much as my political activities.
He gave credit to his mother, Princess Constance Magogo Kadini Zulu, who instilled in him a love for reading and music. Princess Magogo, a composer of Zulu classical music, a singer and poet, was regarded an authority on traditional Zulu music, tradition and folklore. Her music remains as compelling now as it was during her lifetime.
Well, I think that what is very outstanding, which I would recommend even to you just for your own pleasure, is to read, even this book has got a transcript, this book by a young man in this office, of my conversation with Mr. Jimmy Kruger. Mr. Jimmy Kruger was then the Minister of Police and Justice at the time of the apartheid government. This was in 1977. You know, just 2 years after Inkatha was formed, he actually summoned me to Pretoria. I was accompanied by Reverend Tselani Mthetho, and we had a very interesting argument, as you will see if you read it, where he said that, you know, I was actually trying to create problems between white and black if I bring all the Africans together into one organization.
His love for poetry was often reflected in many of his political speeches. A quote by R.A. Stevenson is one he's most fond of. He often talked about his friendship with some of the icons of the liberation struggle, like Nelson Mandela and Oliver Tambo, and shared some fond memories.
To accept independence, that made them give up their grandiose scheme of apartheid. Because I arrested the thing, because they couldn't implement it. You know, at one time, I remember that Mr. Dr. Kurnoff came to see me. He said, no, he was not sent by the government. He was just inquiring for himself. Because, you know, KwaZulu was in patches, because it was mostly areas which were under traditional leadership, in patches, and I used to describe it as something that looked like a Dalmatian dog's skin, you know, the map of KwaZulu. But Dr. Kurnoff came to me and said that, wouldn't you accept it if we gave you the whole of Natal? And I said, no. And really,
It was his beloved wife, Princess Irene Buthelezi, who passed away in 2019, who was his inspiration and companion for 64 years. Buthelezi recalled a memory from her youth when she first met former President Mandela, who came to visit her father in the 1940s.
Where they had even accepted independence, they wanted to categorize me with them, you know, and not to make me an exception, because, I mean, what happened is that the grand plan of the National Party would have succeeded if the Zulu people, the largest ethnic group in South Africa, had agreed to take independence, like Transkei, Botswana, Venda.
He said she was a pillar of strength and unselfishly supported him throughout his political career. But he said even though she always shied away from the public spotlight, she could hold her own amongst heads of state and foreign dignitaries.
She has been a great person, and of course, she played a very important part also. When I was chairman of the Sovereign Black Alliance, which met here in other parts, there was no hotel here. And she used to cook for so many people that came to attend those meetings. She literally, cooked for scores and scores of people and so on, and did this, with a very great heart. She never complained about it.
And what would he do if he was finally retired from active politics? He would read, spend time with his family, feed his soul with one of the greatest joys in life, listening to music. Jade Paul.
Of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi has laid bare the deep scars and unhealed wounds of the widespread violence that engulfed South Africa's black townships in the 80s up until the 90s. On the 17th of June 1992, hundreds of armed men believed to be affiliated to Inkatha stormed the Joe Slovo informal settlement during the night, killing some while leaving others to tell the tale. On that night, Oma Masuetsa, who was 9 months pregnant at the time, took refuge under her bed, but her brother fell victim to the sheer violence.
We heard a gunshot sound. I'm 60 years old, but since birth I've never had such a sound. I don't know what kind of guns they were using. Then our windows started breaking and we heard Mak op, and Vulani Zinja. We then heard the dining room door open. Silence. They started stabbing the bed with spears. We were dead quiet under the bed. Then they started saying the dogs have run away. Then they went out the house breaking things.
One of the bloodiest and brutal moments of violence at the time was construed as attempts by the apartheid government and its collaborators to undermine negotiations as South Africa was entering into its democratic era. Prince Buthelezi, as founder of the IFP, was fingered as someone who sanctioned the violence in collaboration with security forces, a claim he denied. Mita Mulete, who was only 3 at the time of the violence that killed her father, says that a white man in a balaclava had stormed their home and hit her on the head with a panga, leaving her wheelchair bound.
I was hit by a white man on the head, so my mom was trying to protect me, but they got me on the head. That's how I got hurt. This is why I'm in a wheelchair today.
The death of Buthelezi has thrust his complex legacy into the spotlight, with some characterizing it as that of a quote-unquote mass murderer, a claim he denied up until his passing.
I want to say emphatically that I was never involved in any formation of any hit squads against anybody. And I can say before my creator that I've never been involved in any decision to kill one single person, nor has the IFP been involved in such activity.
Survivors who are still navigating the trauma as a result of the violence, however, are numb to his passing.
There's nothing that will make me remember him. He must just rest in peace. I feel numb. There is nothing I feel.
Meanwhile, scores of mourners continue to descend on Buthelezi's homestead. He's expected to be given a send-off on Friday, but there will be no love lost in Boipatong.
Yeah, it was certainly one of the bigger stories in terms of political personalities that the media covered in 2023, the passing of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. And it sparked an interesting debate that you just saw play out in the last 2 minutes, right? Certainly around the story that we told of the legacy of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. I remember around that time we decided to have the discussion here on Media and Society as well, because there was a lot of criticism towards the media. There was a sense that the media was painting this legacy as the struggle icon and forgetting the stories of Boipatong. It's a tough balancing act, right?
Yeah, because he had a very complex legacy. On one end, he's a statesman who played a role in our democratic dispensation. And he was a former deputy president of the country, and he played a role in the unity of the country and the unity of his people, as well as the cohesion of the Zulu nation. He played a very important role, and that cannot be set aside. But I think on the other side, there are people who, really feel aggrieved with the atrocities that he was accused of being a part of, and he's denied that. One was Boipatong. We've got stories from Kagiso when we were growing up. hearing about a lot of the atrocities that were suffered in that time, and a lot of the terror and the reign of terror, that the people suffered from. So I think in terms of justice, what could do his legacy justice is an inquest into those claims, just so that the victims can also get closure, and also for his legacy, if he was really not involved, then the inquest would clear him.
Yeah, but where do the sensitivities of the media then come in? Because it surely is one thing to speak about inquest into the deaths of people in Buipatung and Kagiso, if you will, when someone is alive, but then to bring it up when someone has already passed on, one could say, well, that's a controversial thing. You could have had this discussion a long time ago. Now the family's in mourning. Is this the time for the media to be having this discussion?
I'm actually thinking of the same thing now, that when we have got these, because it happens a lot in our society where we've got these figures that are said to be controversial, that on the one end they are good people, we've seen the contributions that they've made into our society, but there's also the other side that is very, very negative about them, the legacy that is, not something great, all right? So, but I'm thinking about the potential role of the media in focusing on these figures before they even pass on. Because at the time when people have passed on, to be having, and I know that maybe it probably becomes the time to have the conversations because it is topical at the time. But I wonder if we do not want to take an opportunity to focus on these supposedly controversial figures in our society while they are still alive, and see how we could potentially use them to heal areas that need healing in our society, to celebrate parts that need to be celebrated about these figures. Are we not perhaps late to be having these conversations after they have passed?
And here's the thing, who led that discussion around the controversy around Mangosuthu Buthelez's legacy? Was it really mainstream media? Was it initially, when you go back to that time, was it initially mainstream media that said, wow, his legacy is marred with controversy? Or was it social media that said, no, you're not telling the story right? Because there is a sense that social media had to hold media accountable there.
Well, I think it's mostly a grassroots level where people were talking about it on social media, and it wasn't something that was investigated as much as it should have been. But I think in my culture, but they say molato hauboli. If something needs to be investigated, it doesn't matter when it happens, it has to happen. But it is a valid point that it should have happened during the time when he could have been personally held accountable or personally been able to clear himself. Yeah.
Can we talk about the cultural aspect of the coverage of his passing? That was much like we saw with the coronation, the inputting of the king the year before. Just the spectacle of Mangosuthu Buthelez's passing was incredible. The international community wanting to come and watch the funeral of the Prime Minister of the Zulu nation. This was a big international story. I think that's definitely something that stood out for me.
No, definitely. For me, that stood out as well. I suppose it also presented an opportunity to, zoom into the Zulu culture as well. Because the Zulu Prime Minister is now passed on, but he was almost as if a figure that impersonated the Zulu culture as well. So his passing would certainly grab that much attention. But Mntwana has passed on.
Yeah, it was a difficult one. Okay. Give us, I think, a note, perhaps, what we did right and what we did wrong in the coverage of that particular story. And when we've got similar stories of figures like, you're not going to find a lot of figures like him, but big political figures, what the media needs to get right in reporting on those stories. So
they shouldn't wait for people to pass on to have a critical analysis of them. You have the same thing with former President Nelson Mandela. When he was alive, there were people who did question his legacy and some of his decisions. But you would find that because it's not popular, people are not courageous enough to raise their views during that period. And so let's be more critical of our analysis of leaders. The first thing is, look, we've got an election coming up next year. Are we analyzing the qualifications of the people who are coming in, their track record, what have they done in the past? Because if they've never done anything in the past, what do you expect them to do in the future? So what is our critical analysis? And I think we need to work on that. Yeah, there's definitely something to look at there. We're going to have more of these discussions as we look at some of the biggest stories of 2023, and we're getting some ratings from our media analysts on how the media fared in bringing you those stories. You're watching Media and Society. We're back in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome
Welcome back. Well, it is the last day of 2023 and we're looking back at some of the biggest stories of the year and, of course, analyzing how the media brought those stories to you. Let's take you back to this one. On the 7th of April 2023, Thabo Bester and Nani Pamakutumana were arrested in Tanzania and deported back to South Africa. Since then, their trial has been an ongoing feature in the news cycles. Let's take you down memory lane.
It looks like Dr. Makudumana will spend Christmas behind bars as all efforts to be released are coming to naught. Acting Judge Melissa Jordan told the court she could not fault the decision to deny Makudumana bail. She says she agrees with Magistrate Estelle Dilange that Makudumana was the main role player in aiding murder and rape convict Thabo Bester to escape from prison. Jordan says the magistrate did not make an error in finding Makudumana to be a flight risk as she was arrested in Tanzania without a stamped passport. In her appeal, Makudumana's defense told the court that there was no evidence of corruption on her part. However, Jordan opposed that submission, saying the police were able to link her through payments made to accused number 1 Sinue Matswara. A legal analyst says Makudumana still has legal avenues to take.
She still has the legal route to go through, which she can still approach the SCA for petitioning it in order to get it. But however, it's not going to be successful on the basis that firstly remember the conditions of and requirements of bail application. She's a flight risk. She was found with different passports and it was never stamped. Also, she does not have a proper address where she can, we say that when she's been released with bail, now she'll be found on this address. She does not have address currently.
Makudumana's legal representative Machini Mutlou declined to comment, saying he will comment at a later stage.
All the charges against you were dropped. Do you feel vindicated?
Yes, I've been saying from day one that I'm innocent. I've never done anything. I don't even know what happened that night. I've been maintaining that I do not know. I do not know. I do not know. I've been maintaining from day one. I have never done anything wrong and I've never been part of any of this.
These were very serious allegations that were leveled against you. The charges that were brought against you were very serious. What impact did this have on you, your family, and I would say most importantly as well, your children?
Firstly, my job. I mean, it's a lot of people depending on me. And then, you know, some family members distance themselves. People that I thought were my friends distance. You know, people don't want to be associated with somebody that helped the rapist and a murderer escape. You know, and it at some point in the beginning it really hurts, but then I started to make peace with all of this. I mean, for something like this, if I had done this, I would have taken full responsibility for it. I don't have any problem taking responsibility for my wrongdoing. But now you are in the situation whereby you know for a fact that you are innocent and now your kids also has to suffer. And you know, as kids are cruel. Kids are very cruel in schools. So now kids come to your child don't actually know. I mean, for an 8-year-old, what does she know? Now she's being bullied at school because, you know, at home, as parents, sometimes we say certain things in front of kids. Now these kids are taking these things in, tomorrow they act on it. So that is the sad part regarding this whole situation. So that is the only reason also, or not the only reason, but that is the main reason why I still feel a little bit of anger because of the child that is still going through something like this, because I hope that now that I'm being out of this case, charge has been dropped, that hopefully my child will have a proper, you know, childhood, not being bullied because of something that a mother did not do.
The last time I spoke to you was the day that you were released on bail. And you said to me that you do believe that you were set up or you were being framed. Do you still believe that today?
Honestly speaking, yes, I still do. I still do somehow. I can't explain how, but somehow I still do that, believe that somehow I was being framed in this, because obviously with all the evidence being there showing that I had no part in this thing. So, yeah.
While you were on duty on that night, what was the nature of your relationship with Thabo Bester?
I had no relationship whatsoever with that guy. I've never really personally meet this guy. You know, you see these inmates on camera on the monitors when they are being escorted and what so forth. But me, I can't say, even him himself can't even say that he knows me. Maybe heard about me around the prison, but never seen me or heard my voice over the radio. But there was no whatsoever relationship that you can say, because we are always banned by having relationships with inmates. So inmates should know that you, the officer, is an inmate, end of story. So there was no kind of relationships whatsoever.
And what are your thoughts on the justice system and policing in general, especially pertaining to this case where the charges have now been withdrawn against you?
At first I was very angry. At first I was already very angry, but now looking back at it now, you know, it's a lot of questions coming up. Whether these guys did investigate. What did they actually do? How did they come about to just start arresting people without having evidence to prove that this person did 1, 2, 3, 4? And looking back at this whole thing, I feel that they did a lousy job, honestly speaking. I feel it was a lousy job, because if you did a proper investigation, nobody would have been arrested unnecessarily.
Yeah, that was an interview with our very own senior reporter, Griselda Lewis, an exclusive interview that she had with Natasha Jansen, who was one of the accused in the Thabo Bester prison escape matter, but certainly one of those who had all charges against them dropped after there was very little evidence to show her involvement as a G4S employee. Now, we continue, of course, analyzing some of the big stories of 2023 with Tebogo Ditshego and Dr. Sifiso Mnisi. Can we talk a little bit about how this particular woman might have actually, considering that charges against her were dropped, might have actually just felt the full brunt of what it means to be thrust into a media storm? I mean, there she is, her face is everywhere, and then the charges are dropped. Does that actually ever leave her, Doctor?
You know, unfortunately, when it comes to negative news, it's not easy for people to forget. Because even if 10 years later we see a photo in somewhere else, we will still remember her as one of the accused people in the Thabo Bester case. But I must say that I mean, the interview that we've just seen now with Griselda Lewis, that was actually a very, very that's something rare that we see in the media, where because the person is incorrectly implicated in something, their face is splashed in newspapers, broadcasts are there, and it ends there most of the time. So that's actually a very, very good thing that after the saga, she's then again given the opportunity to be on the same platform to speak about her own experience. So I must commend you guys.
I'll pass the message on to Griselda. I'm sure she'll be very happy to hear it. Let's talk a little bit about your views, Deborah, because I think what we chatted about it as well during the package is there's a sense that social media brought us the story before mainstream media, before the authorities caught on to it. That, for me, I think was the biggest magic of the story, is the bits and pieces of it came from ordinary South Africans telling the story.
And it wasn't supposed to be like that. I mean, he should have never gotten away with what he did. I mean, how do you fake your death in a prison and then you use somebody else's corpse and burn it up and run away? That is completely horrific. So many victims in this case, and also bringing our entire justice system into disrepute. It discredits, our standing in terms of our ability, to ensure that people are held accountable for the crimes that they commit. And he's a convicted rapist. He's convicted for very serious crimes. So that, firstly, it's not supposed to happen like that. But justice, it happened, it was delayed, and there were more victims after that, and now they tried to run away into another country. It's only then that it started to catch some spark, and people started to look at the clues and take it from there. But I also wanted to add on to what he said about Ms. Johnson, which is very unfortunate. And I asked myself, yes, it's great that the story was done. I think SABC News did a great job. Griselda did a good job in profiling her and telling a human interest story. But the question still remains, have we educated society about the concept of innocent until proven guilty? If I make an allegation against somebody on social media, are you now going to say that if I'm around you, it's a reputational risk for me? Or do we have the maturity necessary to know that it's a fundamental right in our Constitution that you are innocent until proven guilty?
Yeah.
And we don't want people who go through the justice system and are found not guilty or are exonerated to now be alienated from society, alienated from participating economically, alienated even socially from society. We don't need that. And I think it's important for the public to know that you shouldn't overrule what the court did and have your own rules and say, well, based on me, I still think that you're guilty.
Yeah.
I think we should have trust and respect for the judicial process.
Yeah, I think that there's something to be said though about ethical competency on the part of media professionals, right? And what we tend to do is there was a sense that one could argue that we ran to the Thabo Bester story because it became popular and not necessarily because, hold on, there is an ethical responsibility to go towards the story. I'm talking about right at the very, very beginning.
Yes.
Many people in newsrooms will tell you that at the beginning of the story as it was developing, many people in newsrooms said, well, it's not a story just yet. It's not a story, And we need to talk about the ethical competency after the fact, protecting Ms. Natasha Janssen's reputation, and then even before the fact of when we actually decide that a story is newsworthy without waiting for it to trend first, surely.
I think that is when we see the power of social media in its potential to give voice to the voiceless, because often we notice how some of the big stories of our time often start on social media. So it is playing a very, very essential role in that sense.
And also in terms of public interest.
Yes.
So just because something is popular doesn't mean that it's true. Like, there are people who think certain things and it's very popular, but it's not true.
Right.
And also, just because it's popular doesn't necessarily mean, if it's unpopular, it doesn't mean it's not of public interest.
Yes.
And so it's not a popularity contest. That's not what news is. News is more about what is of the public's interest.
Yeah.
And we've got a dynamic public. And I think what is missing is the public that is marginalized, that doesn't advertise in the media, in the townships and rural areas. There are serious stories that we need to address. For example, if we're talking about Thabo Bester and Dr. Nandipa Magudumana, what about we go back to their history? How did they end up being in the situation that they're in?
Yeah.
Because if we do not go to the root cause, we're going to see ourselves continuing this cycle. So what we do is we look at the surface and say, Bonnie and Clyde, Forever, and all of these things that we do, and we entertain ourselves with these stories at the surface. But we don't go to the root cause, and then we wonder why it keeps repeating itself.
It's actually frightening what you're talking about. And you're right. I mean, there was the image of when we saw them meeting in the courtroom for the very first time.
Yeah.
And instead of people being focused on the content of the story, everyone was, look at how they're looking at each other.
Yeah.
And the world was watching this. Let's remember that. We had the international media community, certainly the African media community, the likes of Tanzania watching it as well, because a lot of this has unfolded within their borders as well. What was the story that we told to the world about who we are as a nation in this particular case? Debo, do you want to take it first?
Well, I think that as a nation, it was an embarrassing story.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that it was very humiliating just how it went. But I think we should say kudos to the Tanzanian authorities for providing the necessary support, and to ensure that they are brought to book, because if they moved to another country where they wouldn't be able to be extradited, it would have been extreme humiliation on that side.
Yeah.
So I think we have, done well after the fact, but I think prevention is better than cure. In future, we need to make sure that these things don't happen at all.
Yeah. What it said to the world about us.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was embarrassing, to be honest. I mean, also how you would be listening to some radio talk shows, for example, and then questions, are being asked about what did you think of the way they were looking at each other as if we were entertaining that. That is not something to focus on. It was disgusting. It wasn't right. These are people who have committed crimes and should not in any manner seek to romanticize what they are doing, romanticize their presence or together or whatever. That was a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to keep looking at some of the stories from 2023 on this edition of Media and Society. On this morning of New Year's Eve, we're highlighting some of the big stories of the year. Another big one has been talks around climate change really getting bigger and bigger this year. South Africa has been hit by challenging weather conditions in 2023. One of the most affected areas, of course, was KwaZulu-Natal, which saw many residents, not just this year, but last year as well, left destitute. Take a look.
In Cato Crest in Mayville in Durban, rescue teams continued their search for 4 people reported missing. A 10-year-old survivor spoke of her terrifying ordeal when their house was flooded.
We saw water flooding inside the house and we could not open the door. My mother stripped off the corrugated iron and we managed to get out. We were swept by water. And while in the river, I managed to hang on the tree, but I never saw my mother after that.
Another child was amongst the 3 bodies who were recovered. Many who escaped the flood waters say they were lucky.
We had just walked out when we discovered that my aunt was missing.
On Tuesday afternoon, the Inanda area in the north of the city was lashed by strong winds, which many said looked like a tornado. Residents were left devastated as roofs were ripped off and informal houses destroyed. The windstorm left a trail of destruction with electricity poles uprooted and debris scattered everywhere. Residents were traumatized.
I was so scared. What I've seen yesterday, I've never seen before. And I'm so scared too, even I'm talking to you. I'm still scared, I'm shocked. But God is with us. I'm here because I'm safe.
Some lost everything.
Wind was heavy and was raining too. That's why everything is damaged.
More than 100 community members who were left homeless have sought shelter in the Amawoti Community Hall. NGOs provided blankets and food parcels. In Pinetown, in Durban's Outer West, several roads were flooded and rendered impassable. At least one driver was rescued from his vehicle after being caught in flood waters. A number of vehicles were reported to have been swept away by flood waters. Mlonde Khatebe, SABC News, Durban.
And certainly in December, what we have seen is really hot temperatures as well in various parts of the country. So climate change becoming a really big discussion, not just in South Africa, but certainly on the African continent. This as the world tries to, of course, pressure us to have that just energy transition. But we continue covering how the media has looked at stories such as climate change in 2023. We're still with Tebogo Ditshego, CEO of Ditshego Media, and of course, Dr. Sfiso Mnisi, who is with the Department of Communications at UJ. Let's bring in one. I think I want to ask the most basic question. Do you feel that the climate change story is being told enough and has been told enough in 2023? And the reason why I ask that is I wonder if some journalists are still intimidated by the scientific element of the conversation.
A quick answer to that is no.
Yeah.
I think even the way in which the media reports on these devastations, the focus is, so I mean, the conversation is not always climate change. It is about the disaster that is happening.
It's the weather.
It's the weather. Yes,
right.
People have lost their lives. There's a devastation that we are seeing, but the conversation is seldomly on the topic of climate change. I am missing that in our media.
And it's an important discussion, right? Because you do have these power dynamics that are playing out on a global scale for just energy transitions. And at the same time, when we have these extreme weather disasters like we saw continuously happening in areas like KwaZulu-Natal, what we do is, again, we focus on the weather. Do we need to be making that link, Debo?
Absolutely. I mean, I wonder if we even understand why disaster management is so important, especially in our country. If you look at the spatial planning of apartheid, and you look at how black people and previously disadvantaged people are in squatter camps, and they don't have infrastructure that is necessary for them to be safe when there is, weather hazards. You know that it disproportionately affects previously disadvantaged people.
Yeah.
But where is the conversation around town and regional planning? How are we going to change and revolutionize our town and regional planning so that each and every citizen has a dignified space to live in?
Yeah.
If you look at all those disasters, that is where a lot of black people stay. That is where, African marginalized and previously disadvantaged people stay. Now, if you look at, on my side, I mean, we do business with international companies and global companies. For us to do business with these companies, we need climate, conducive policies. We need green policies. You can't do business now if you don't have green policies.
Yeah.
You also need, as a corporation, need to make sure that you protect the previously disadvantaged people.
Yeah.
And that's why you're going to see more global conglomerates coming on board and supporting black companies. But the last thing that I just wanted to add is that in Germany, they've got a law in which they, institutionalize these changes.
Right.
And these are the kind of conversations we should be having.
Yeah, and one wonders if we've even got the language to speak to our people around climate change. I mean, climate change in our, greenhouse gases. Do we even have the words for it to speak to our very own people? Well, we're going to continue highlighting some of the big stories of 2023 and how the media brought those stories to you. Do stay with Media and Society. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. You're still watching Media and Society, and we're looking at some of the highlights of 2023. We're going to wrap the show up with certainly a highlight that put a smile on the face of every single South African. The highlight of the year was definitely the Springbok win in the midst of rising food prices, petrol prices, and load shedding as well. It was welcome good news, certainly one that South Africans were waiting for.
Given the serious challenges that the country and the world is facing, this win could not have come at a better time.
Oh, it means the world. Watching them from the start until the finish, nail-biting stuff. We were always behind the boys, and we're so happy for the boys.
As a country, each and every one, we stand together. We are proud as South Africans. Let's go, Boka! Go, Boka!
Do you feel like there was a win though?
What does
do you
the
feel like?
scoreboard say?
No, but do you feel like you won that game?
That wasn't the question. It's all about
finals footy.
I mean, it could have gone either way, and I knew it's going to be a tight game. Being an ex-player myself, I thought the weather favoured New Zealand, but at the end of the day, South Africa prevailed. So,
as someone who's trying to aspire to play at this level, especially for the women's, I think it was an amazing game to watch. Just seeing that skill, just seeing how they played, how they kept fighting for that win. It was an amazing game to watch. I'm so glad I got this experience.
And we're going to cut out of that because we can go on and on and on, you know, sharing the experiences of South Africans that were watching, certainly the final, at the very least, of the Rugby World Cup for 2023 that we won, of course, and it was a great moment. Can we talk a little bit about how, for the first time, you had ordinary South Africans that didn't even know how rugby actually works watching rugby this year with this World Cup? It was astounding. I think I can admit I'm one of those people.
Yeah, so there were a lot of people who admitted that, you know, I don't even know why they're kicking the ball that way. Why are they grabbing each other? But I just want them to grab them in a way that we're going to win. So It was an educating experience for a lot of people. And I can say that South Africans were united behind the Springboks. I think we should congratulate the Springboks, Safu and Siya Kolisi. They did a fantastic job. I think this is good for the morale of the nation. It's good for, you know, in terms of nation building, social cohesion, that I agree that we are stronger together, united in our diversity. Some people reject that because we haven't succeeded in really structurally destroying, you know, institutional discrimination and racism.
Yeah.
But just because we haven't won yet doesn't mean that we're not making progress. And I think that this is a microcosm of the progress that we made. But it's also a lesson for us that we need to also speak about rugby and other sporting codes being more available in our schools so that we can develop more young people who have the infrastructure to succeed.
Yeah, Dr. Mnisi, final thoughts from you.
I think
so the lesson that we take certainly from the Rugby World Cup and the coverage thereof.
See, we have seen sports playing a very, very important role of unifying the nation. The an important question that we need to ask ourselves is, how do we make that unity that we see during these moments lasting? How do we make it last? How do we make it real?
Yeah, that's the task that the media will then take on for the year 2024. Gentlemen, an absolute pleasure having you with us, and a happy new year to you.
Happy New Year.
We'll see you once again in 2024. Have a great crossover. And that's how we wrap up Media and Society. We'll meet up again in 2024. Thank you so much for joining us.